Well, hello and welcome everyone to today's roundtable. Today we will be diving into a very exciting topic, mastering learning and retention, strategies for a skilled, adaptable workforce. Today's session is approved by SHRM, HRCI, and ATD for professional development credits. Let's go ahead and meet today's speakers. First up, we have Michael Rochelle. Michael is the Chief Strategy Officer and co-founder at Brandon Hall Group. Michael serves in a variety of roles, including overseeing research and advisory support for organizations and solution providers. Michael is one of the company's principal analysts, covering all areas of human capital management. Michael has 40 years of experience in our space. Next up, we have Dr. Jill Stefaniak. Jill is the Chief Learning Officer at Litmos. Her interests focus on the professional development of L&D professionals and instructional design decision-making. She also serves as an associate professor in the Learning, Design, and Technology program at the University of Georgia. This content represents the opinions of Jill Stefaniak. It carries no endorsement of the University of Georgia. Next up, we have Kylie Stair. Kylie is the Chief People Officer at Litmos, where she is dedicated to driving business success by building highly engaged, inclusive, and empowered teams. In her role, Kylie oversees the global HR organization and is responsible for all aspects of the company's people strategy, including talent acquisition, learning and development, compensation, benefits, diversity, equity, and inclusion, organizational design, employee relations, and people tools and technologies. Thank you to today's roundtable sponsor, Litmos. Litmos develops learning solutions for top-performing companies. Litmos Learning Solution includes the easiest-to-use LMS, comprehensive content collections, and services to support success. Thousands of companies trust Litmos to train employees, customers, and partners. Be sure to visit them at www.litmos.com. We want to remind everyone that the annual Brandon Hall Group Excellence Conference is being held in Florida, January 28th through the 30th, 2025. Registration is now open, and we cannot wait to see you all there. We also invite you, as always, to participate in our research surveys. We have 3 that are active now, and links will be available in your handout, or you can always visit brandonhall.com. Once the results are analyzed, all participants receive a piece of complimentary research and other exclusive benefits. We currently have our Excellence in Action program open for application. For more information, please check out excellenceawards.brandonhall.com. Our institute represents the culmination of 3 decades of excellence in HCM and includes evidence-based solutions for your most pressing challenges, professional development for your entire team, access to the collective wisdom of global HCM leaders, and networking with peers who share your commitment to excellence. We are excited to share that at the end of today's roundtable, we will be selecting 2 raffle winners. You could be a winner of 50% off the 2025 HCM Excellence Conference, or you could win a free Excellence in Action program submission. Stay tuned to see if you are the lucky winner, and you must be present to win. And now, lastly, just a quick few things to note. If you have any questions, please use the questions panel on your control bar, and we'll have time for Q&A at the end. We are recording this roundtable and will email you the link and a PDF of the slides within 24 hours. The chat box is open, so please feel free to share your thoughts as we go along. Your input makes this more valuable for everyone. Now, I would like to pass things off to Michael Rochelle.
Well, welcome everyone. Kylie, Jill, welcome as well. Michael Rochelle. This is a super important topic. I know that you probably hear a lot of roundtables that open up, but what could be more important than retaining great employees? And we're here today to make that strong connection between why learning is such an important retention tool. We've got a couple of experts on today that can guide us through that discussion. Just to remind everyone, when you were signing up for the roundtable, we were going to cover these areas. And these are the important building blocks to what we think is and being able to drive that masterclass and understanding the connection between learning and retention. But to kind of get us triggered and get us thinking and get the ideas flowing, we're going to do a poll question. And then we're going to show you actually what other survey respondents that are not part of this roundtable answered the same questions. So let's go to the first poll question. So what we want to know is, to what degree do you think about learning as a retention tool? When we say learning, just learning within your organization. We'll give you about 30 seconds to answer the poll, then we'll share the results. So while we're waiting for that, Kylie and Jill, it's great to have you here. I know that you've spent a lot of time and energy in this space from your respective positions. What do you think the answer is going to be here?
I'm hoping it's definitely, but I'm anxiously awaiting.
Okay.
Same response. And I think it's really important to think about honestly answering it as well, and maybe some challenges that you face too. So we'll be curious to see.
That's a good one, Kylie. Again, the questions are wide open. Please fill up the chat. We're here to answer anything that you want to get answered today. Okay, so let's close this out. Let's see how we did. Well, there we are. Definitely. So we're on the right track already. So 82% said definitely. 5% said not really. So that's great. So at least we have an audience that's really super connected to the subject. But let's take a look at what a previous survey said on the same question. So there we are. It's a blueprint. So that's good. But now, as we always talk about, the devil's in the details, right? So let's go back to our agenda slide and let's get chatting about this. So innovative approaches to reskilling and upskilling, in particular, Kylie and Jill, the effective methods for knowledge transfer. What does all that mean? Like, how do you synthesize all that? You know, how do you scrub that?
Jill, feel free to start, because I feel like I know where you're going to go with this, and I'll probably tag on.
So certain things that come to my mind, and I'll probably bounce around a little bit, is allowing time for transfer. I think a lot of companies do a good job at pushing out content and training content to their employees. But like anytime we're trying to learn something new, an outcome of learning is a permanent change in behavior. And so some things are easier for us to learn and apply than others. And so I think we need to be really intentional and think through some of this to allow time to digest content. I don't think we do the best job of that, because usually we're in such a rush and we're so used to just go, move on to the next thing. So really allowing for time after training, allowing time for our learners to digest that information, to talk to their colleagues or their managers and supervisors about what are some meaningful ways they can apply this new knowledge that they've acquired, and then allowing for that follow-up to see what does that look like in those transfer settings. And I think that's where that's the route we should be going. I think there's a lot of barriers and challenges that people face doing that, because we have a lot of competing interests and priorities within our just day-to-day work lives. But I think when we think about effective methods, thinking about what would that process look like if we were to kind of map out what a training trajectory might look like for a learner to be able to get some more meaningful results. And then of course, tying that to measuring that performance as well.
Yeah, which I definitely think is on here as well, kind of the ROI. When I think about it from my role as well, and Jill and I have a lot of interactions around kind of the work that she does outside of Litmos, and then how we look at applying it within Litmos as well. And we're in a very unique situation of working at an organization that focuses on L&D, and how we continue to improve upon it within our own internal workforce as well. And so a lot of dialogue around this. I think I 100% agree around having the time. One of the topics that I think maybe correlates or relates to all of these buckets, one of the things that we started talking about at Litmos in particular was building out L&D guidelines for our organization. And I think this started with, well, how much time do people already take on required topics when it comes to compliance training or functional, required training? And why don't we look at assigning some sort of awareness, like writing down these guidelines around how much do we at Litmos require people to take already? Because we need to be cognizant of the time that people spend not only in learning something and then applying it afterwards, but how much time is required just for the compliance side of the house as well, which I think we all probably face in this environment. And so one thing that we did at Litmos in particular was worked with our executive leadership team, which I think is really important when you talk about getting buy-in, which probably transcends a couple of these topics as well, around what do we expect our teams to spend time on, and then where do we also encourage additional time to be spent around the L&D topics too. And so, if we recognize in our compliance learning paths and maybe security training or other types of privacy training, things that we have to do, functional training, already X amount of time is being spent here, but we know that as a company. We've written that, we've shared it out with employees, shared it out with managers as well. And then how do you have support around them? Where do we dive in for that time that we allow? I think it's important when we think about reskilling, upskilling, that we don't try and do too much at once. There are so many very specific departments that may have in your organization, depending on where you're looking at for your strategy with L&D. Are you aligned to the business strategy? So for example, do we need to base off our business strategy of maybe our growth pillars or whatever we're looking at around sales or customer success? We talk a lot about sales, customer success roles as well. But are we maybe doing a needs analysis around where specifically do we need to dive in first when it comes to reskilling and upskilling also, which I think is an important topic because I don't know that you can tackle it all at once. I don't know, Jill, if you have any thoughts about that side of the house as well.
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to, I'm a big proponent and a big advocate for L&D and for training. But when we think about where it fits into the workplace, we have to think about if we're having our employees going through training, what are we taking away? So, how are we providing coverage along that? We hear so many companies boast that they're striving to be these learning organizations. That's a phrase that we see a lot. And to truly do that, that's where, you have to see what buy-in do we have, especially from the organization and senior leadership. It's one thing to say we want to be one. It's one thing to say we want employees to go through a lot of training. How are we providing coverage? Like I always think of people working in retail, customer service, healthcare. We're not going to shut down the emergency room so everyone can go to training. We have to be thinking about what other investments are we putting in so that the business can still function while training is occurring, as well as making sure our employees are going through meaningful training. And so I love this idea when you think about creating L&D guidelines that really gets your senior leadership to start thinking about what does it mean to say we're a learning organization? If we say we're prioritizing and we value training, to what extent do we value training? And I think having people being open and honest as they're establishing those guidelines, that really makes you think going, are we really as committed to this as what we've said? Is it just lip service? But it also allows you that opportunity to engage in some meaningful conversations to then start thinking about what training is most important. How is L&D going to help support our strategic planning goals for our organization? That helps us then start to prioritize what training content makes the most sense for different employees within our organization.
It's interesting. There's a couple questions that have come in, so you've triggered a couple things. So the first one is the whole time issue. So a member of the audience is asking, how do you get business professionals, particularly executive managers? Back to your point, Kylie, it sounds like you've got a very, responsive group of executives that really want to make this happen within your organization. Julie brought up how important it is to get time to be right for the learner. But there's so many organizations, and I think this question comes up a lot, is how do you sell the extra time? You're in this performance-driven environment, got to get stuff done let's face it, a lot of managers are like, training's good, but it can't take away from getting the work done. How do you convince upper level management to stand tall and say no? If we want to future-proof our organization, if we want to be scalable, if we want to have a competitive advantage, training is as important time-wise as actually doing the thing itself. What's some techniques in getting that sold?
I think it's having, from my perspective and experience, one, it's having the buy-in. If you're not maybe on the executive leadership team yourself, having that sponsor who is bringing that to the table, whether it's maybe your chief people officer, CHRO, or someone else who's consistently raising this as a topic within these conversations with the senior leadership team or executive leadership team. We are not immune as a learning company to the topic of time is money sort of thing. And I also hear this is still within our organization around the amount of time it takes away from other employees having the impact, feet on the ground, doing XYZ, selling, coding, whatever it is. We talk about how do we get our employees involved in a conversation for providing feedback as to how they would like to see or what would be helpful for them to be able to feel like they can take also the time away to focus on L&D. We look at, and we're looking at in particular, days of learning, building into our culture around these days of learning, where maybe we have a day or a week worth of learning in which we have challenges, competitions, or exciting things that we're sharing around with the whole company, not just with the ELT, around, what are we focusing this week and this day, but building it back into our strategy. So we're talking about this for 2025 now. We're not going to come up and say next week or a week, from now or a month from now, should we have a learning day? We're talking about it now as we build it into our people strategy that's tied to the business strategy. How can I get the buy-in now for 6 months from now? Right? And we say, we all agreed on this collectively together. Now let's see how it comes to life. It's a constant conversation. It can't be a one and done.
Yeah, and a follow-up question to that, and I think it's kind of riffing off of this whole getting the attention of folks to make the business case. Who do you invite to the party? So the question is, who are the stakeholders that should be involved in this all-important conversation? I'm going to add a little bit of difficulty to the question, and how do you get them there?
Who are the stakeholders? In the conversation, I always don't lose sight of the impact that L&D can have, or this organization can have, on the manager, the first level managers. They are the ones who are actually going to bring a lot of this to life for you and for themselves and for their teams, right? How do we enable them and give them the right tools and information at the right time to help them feel comfortable and confident to manage their own teams in development plans? How have we built in individual development plan conversations into our performance management topics? For those who don't know, Litmos is fairly new on this journey. We're only 2 years into being divested from a bigger company with SAP, which means we had to stand up every single L&D process and performance management process over the last couple of years. So we're still on a journey as well ourselves. One of the things we identified from the beginning that was maybe different than SAP or where other people had come from is we need to have a more formalized structure around time for individual development plans, a formal process for documenting goals in the system so we can incorporate individual goals into those and learning goals into that process as well. The buy-in of first level leaders is extremely important in my mind. I don't think you change a culture without them being part of the conversation.
And
Jill, any thoughts?
Yeah, I was going to say, just to add to that, it's certainly, I think, a culture shift. And that takes time too. And so again, I think your first place to start is getting your executive leadership team on board, that this is what they're going to prioritize, so that as they go off to their respective teams, and we think about, sometimes we feel siloed, but as they're going off and working with their respective teams, that message is continuing to trickle throughout the organization. The other challenge that we have is when we think about individual development plans, oftentimes sometimes, depending on which company you work at, you have your annual performance review. And that's usually when you're asked to set your goals for the next year. And very rarely are we allowed to just stick with those goals, right? Because we have changing things come up, different things happen in the workplace. We have to change our priority and focus. And it's not like when our supervisors are coming to us asking us to flex or pivot that we say, oh, excuse me, I have to go and update my individualized plan for my performance analysis. I have to update my goals. That doesn't happen. And then what typically happens is we get closer, you know what, we're a week or two out, maybe we're a day out before our performance evaluation, and we're looking going, oh no, my goals changed. I didn't do these, but I've done all these other things.
Yeah.
And I think that's still always going to be a challenge in the workplace, but if we can start having conversations and weaving in L&D, so when we think about goal setting and going, what types of L&D practices are going to help you be most successful? I think that's where we have that opportunity. And that kind of gets back to building and sustaining that culture of having a learning organization. And then I also think it's listening, and it's providing your managers and supervisors with the flexibility that they need to be able to work with their employees to figure out, what does that training look like? That's going to look very different depending on the skills that different employees are looking to enhance or improve. And so allowing them the flexibility of what makes the most sense given their respective roles within your organization.
A couple more questions. And I think you struck a chord with a lot of folks. So the first question is advice on prioritizing L&D initiatives that are more future focused. So like the example being AI. So like you got so much you want people to know, like right now. How do you make time for what they're going to need to know? Like, how do you justify that when it's not going to lead to like an immediate thing?
Yeah, Jill and I were talking specifically about AI the other day, because I think we're in an interesting, sometimes I think the conversation comes to buy the skill versus build the skill. Are we buying talent, hiring talent, getting external contractors with talent with these current skills that we need today? And then how do we work on getting then our workforce those skills for the future? And I think AI is a very real example of that, of gaps that we may have around technical talent or others around this AI process. And I say it because we're living it ourselves at Litmos around, you know, some of these topics. And, you know, Jill and I were talking about maybe this gap between where then, because she has such a unique perspective of coming from the educational background, like where are we building skills further or earlier in careers or with the university or whatever into, you know, into the workforce as well. Let me pause for a minute, because I think, Jill, we talked a little bit about this, but I think it's a very real example of sometimes you may need to move quicker and then build along the way.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the challenges, it's exciting to watch, but one of the challenges I think that a lot of companies are experiencing, and we're definitely seeing it in the L&D industry, is that we have not seen technology explode at such an exponential rate as generative AI. And so one of the challenges we have, even if you look at just development of policy and the legality of different things, where we are building the plane as we are trying to fly it. And that's what becomes really exciting in some ways, but also really challenging and a little frustrating. And so I think, you know, 4 or 5 years out, we're going to see all kinds of institutions in higher ed offering degrees in AI and prompt engineering. We're going to have very specific jobs that we don't even know yet what they're going to be, but those are going to be out there. So it's going to be a lot easier to be hiring for some of these individuals. But when you're, you know, faced today with, we need to start working on these things, this is where upskilling is so important. When we're seeing trends too, just in the workplace with the great stay, we're not seeing people moving around as much as what they once were, even, you know, several years ago. And so I think it's really looking at your current pool of talent and going, who has the potential here to be able to upskill, and how do we do that meaningfully? I think part of it too is thinking about and communicating your strategic plan to your employees. That goes back. So it's not just the document that your executive leadership reviews. It's really having those conversations to be being proactive with these individualized plans and career development. So maybe you're having conversations and talking to your employees about where do you see yourself, 2-3 years from now? What do those roles look like within the organization? What can we start doing now to be able to help with upskilling and preparing you to be able for your next role within the organization if we're looking at employees staying. But again, it's that balancing act, I think, with thinking about trying to be forward thinking about what we need, still keeping it relevant, and then still thinking about how do we maintain focus on what training do they need now to be most successful. And that it's kind of just that it's that catch-22 that I think a lot of organizations are in today.
I think that goes back to do you know your company's strategy? And how are you helping specific functions or areas in identifying where to upskill and sharing? Upskilling is not by any means a quick thing. And I think we need to all understand that it's a journey that people go on. But understanding your business's key strategic points, growth initiatives, whatever it's going to be, now's the perfect time to do it, given we're in the end of 2024 for thinking about 2025. Build it in.
All right, let's launch our second poll question. So I think this fits in very well with the questions that were asked from the audience. So we've been talking about culture. And so the question basically is, where do you think you fall in terms of fostering a culture of continuous, and I'll add lifelong learning? Give it a few more seconds, and then we'll not only share the results of the poll, but can also share the results from the survey. Okay, interesting. So we've got definitely being about 22%. So you would hope that that would be 100%. So I think we can put that in our back pocket. What's really surprising here, I think, for this audience is almost 80% of people feel not really, kind of, sort of, but not really. And I'd love to get questions or comments in from the audience as to why do 80% of you feel like you're not there? Why don't you have a culture of lifelong learning? Like, what are the obstacles, or what are the distractors? What's pulling you away from that? Because I'm sure we all agree we should have one. But let's take a look at what the survey said previously, and you can see where about twice the number of people said definitely. So it was a much larger group. So feel free to throw it in. Continuous thinking. We'll definitely address what those are if you have any questions about what to overcome them. But let's get back to the agenda and kind of hit our second big area, which is going to be probably one of the most important areas to talk about, is what are the actual techniques. So we've been talking a lot about IDPs, making it important, creating the relevance of why people need to learn what they need to learn. That's the key to engagement and retention, is if I'm going to put this time and effort in, what's in it for me, not just what's in it for the organization. But in particular, Jill, and kind of like, what's the role of tech play in this kind of personalized skill development? How does that connection, that electronic digital gateway, really, enhance employee retention when we're learning?
I'm really excited about this right now, because I think what we're going to see in the next couple of years is going to be just a huge transformation in terms of how L&D can support employee retention as well as that personal skill development. And so, and a lot of it is going to be, as a result, because of what we're able to leverage with generative AI. I think we're going to see a lot more emphasis and focus being placed on what feedback looks like in terms of learning. And that I get really excited about that. I think, if we think about personalized learning, these are terms: personalized learning, adaptive learning. Those are phrases we hear all the time in the L&D industry, and you see a lot of people talking about them. They're topics that come up in webinars and blogs and different conference presentations. But what's really exciting about this is that I think generative AI is going to allow organizations to be able to intervene when necessary. So if you imagine yourself going through an online training module and you're getting stuck on a particular concept, to have a chat bot perhaps, or an AI assistant pop up to say, I've noticed you've been struggling with this. And maybe it's providing you with some additional information or some additional examples. So that way then you can continue on and then continue progressing through that module. I think that's where we're going to see more personalized skill development. I think we're going to see being able to provide more immediate feedback to our learners, so that it's not just necessarily knowledge checkpoints that we typically see with a lot of e-learning modules. I think we're going to see more with analytics that our admins are going to be able to use, our managers, our supervisors, our HR teams, to be able to really track an employee's learning trajectory. And so we hear a lot about learning paths and personalized learning, but if we thought about each of those employees as having their own learning profile that we can track to really understand their learning story as they go through, that's also going to provide us with some additional and more rich metrics to measure learning, but also to kind of help pinpoint what types of resources and what types of training do they need. Time's that variable. Time comes up with everything. That's a challenge that we're all faced with. And so again, I think what we're going to be able to see with employee retention and some of these ways we can leverage technology is that to identify what do our learners need, so that they're not focusing their time and effort on redundant content that they don't really need, but we're just serving that checkbox, and we can really figure out what it is that would benefit them so we can continue improving on their own personal development.
Jill, I'm going to jump in because there's two burning questions. You're getting a lot of questions from the audience, so I'm going to hit you with both of them. How about that? So the first one is, people jumped on when they said, what's in it for me learning? So a great example is, I'm doing fire extinguisher training, compliance training. That is a moonshot between my personal and professional growth. What's in it for me? And just plain needing to do something correctly in the company so we don't burn down the building. How do you make that connection? Like, how do you sell that kind of learning to people and say, oh yeah, this is going to help you in your time here with the organization?
I think it's spending time to sell the relevance and not making assumptions that people understand what the relevance is. I also think when we talk about the relevance of training and the importance of training, it's not just saying it once, but it's saying it multiple times and in multiple ways. And so I think, if we think about compliance training, or we think about things that are related to health and safety, there are legal implications if we aren't aware of some of those concepts and some of those laws and rules. And so it might not always be the most fun training for employees, but explaining to them the relevance of why this is needed, why they need to do it, I think that's important. And when people realize, what those implications are, what are the consequences if they don't do it, how that impacts them as individuals, how it impacts the organization overall as a whole, I think that's really important. And then, of course, when we're talking about upskilling and providing them with new content, what's the relevance in this? Anytime we see organizations, implementing changes, perhaps there's going to be a shift in how we've done things. And so we're expecting, we hear those phrases like, we've never done it like this before. It's worked fine the last, 10, 15 years. Anytime we're expecting a change in performance, I think it's important to be able to communicate the rationale behind that, and not just say, this is the path we're going, you have to do this, but explaining the rationale behind it. Now, employees might not always like or agree with the rationale, but I think providing that rationale and explaining that relevance of why that L&D content is being used to support those changes and those initiatives is really important.
So Kylie, as a chief people officer, question is, who owns the culture of continuous learning?
Well, my answer, of course, is everyone.
I like that answer.
You cannot create it on your own. You can't. It would be an uphill battle if you try and think that it's just one organization or one person who's creating this learning culture. And that's why we talk a lot about getting the buy-in. We have at Litmos, we've created over the past couple of years, as mentioned, a culture ambassador group that focuses on all things culture, which includes L&D. You know, and some of what we've done with that team as well is started to incorporate their ideas and just them as people offering their help in our onboarding training. And, you know, some of the people, for example, who are on the culture ambassador team are part of our demo team. And so they give product training to our new employees who start. And they're the ones who go through and do it, right? It's not me giving product training or us building it into just an e-learning. It's that interactive kind of where everyone's part of the conversation. So, you know, that's just one example. I think going back to this tech side of the house as well, understand what tools you're using today for L&D and also where they may integrate into others. So we talk about personalized learning. So like, do you have an integration to Salesforce? And so is there a way in which your L&D tool is helping to measure like real-time things for your other applications that people may be in all day, every day? What do those integrations look like from being able to look at these personalized learning journeys as well for your sales team or customer team or other sorts of individuals? I think also compliance training. I've had a whole conversation about compliance training. Some compliance training, people are getting very creative and is actually kind of fun, like quote unquote. Like they've come up with different ways than just kind of, you know, going through this specific content at this point in time. I've seen some really unique examples, but one of the things that we think about at Litmos is we do not, and we started to evolve over time, do it all at one time type of lump sum, and it's just like hit at you for like 7 hours, you know, annual training process or whatever. Like we've actually staggered it into more of these like boost processes or even micro learnings around very specific topics that we kind of go throughout the year. And so it doesn't feel as much, in my mind, at least so far with us rolling this out, we just rolled it out in 2024, is it's not a forced like sit down, get through it all at once sort of process, but a constant reminder. Compliance topics change constantly, by the way. Making sure you have the right content, that's always staying up to date with that. But maybe look at your tool today. Do you have like a boost function that can push things out to your employees at a certain point in time as reminders or as a separate sort of process that you're kicking off? You don't have to do it all at one point in time sometimes.
So I'm going to ask you a question, Jill, while we're launching the poll question. So we're going to be multitasking. So let's launch the next poll question. So here for the audience, we're asking about what your challenges are, and you can mark more than one. But Jill, the question that came in, back to you being a CLO and having to deal with this, is people think that the only quantifiable learning in a lot of organizations is the stuff that you can like measure on in an e-learning environment, like completion, grades, you know, certification level, you know, and that all this other stuff that we do, like social collaborative learning, peer-to-peer, coaching, mentoring, other things, people shy away from because they think it's quote unquote not as measurable. Like, what do you use as metrics to make those be highly impactful? Because when we look at our research, you know, the use of certain types of modalities is not the same as the effectiveness. They're opposite charts. Everything at the top of usage is at the bottom of effectiveness. So maybe you can answer that while we're closing out the poll here, and we'll bring out the answers to the poll.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a challenge. And I think that's why when you talk to a lot of L&D professionals and even HR professionals, that phrase ROI is really hard to address, and for a lot of different reasons. I think we have a lot of organizations that are expecting, and senior leadership that are expecting quick responses, and that's why they want the data, they want the numbers to inform things. And what the challenges that we have is that there's so many intangible benefits and intangible metrics that we can't, we know it's there, we feel it's there, we experience it, and it's really hard to put that in metrics. And so what I think, not to say that it's easier said than done, but I think being able to engage in these conversations with leadership when we talk about strategic planning and we talk about ROI, to really think about what are those metrics that we can gather, and what story do they tell us, but also not just ignoring those intangibles either. So when we think about employee morale, sometimes we can capture on that with self-reports, but not always. Creativity, productivity, there are certain ways we can measure that, and then there's other ways that we can't. And so I think it's really looking at that whole story. The other challenge that we have with ROI, is particularly, I think, with L&D, is being able to isolate L&D completely and say, because you've participated in this training or this particular training initiative, this is why we're seeing all this success here. And I think it's breaking that mindset a bit, especially when we think about, I'm not that surprised by the poll that we saw earlier, where over 50% said they're somewhat feeling like their company's promoting a culture of continuous learning, because I think it's breaking that mindset of what that looks like. And if we're embedding and valuing L&D, and we're advocating for L&D, and we're allowing L&D to participate in some of these strategic conversations at our organization, then that's where we have that opportunity to be able to engage in these discussions. If L&D should, a continuous learning organization, L&D should be woven into a lot of these pieces. And that kind of breaks up that siloed mentality that ROI, everything needs to be isolated in order for it to be deemed successful or valuable to our organization. And so I think it's having those conversations and thinking about how your units can work together across the organization to support your strategic goals. But I think those are the challenges that a lot of L&D professionals are faced with. And that's why we see people reporting really quick on the metrics, like this many employees participated in this training. These were their scores on the knowledge checks for these modules. Because they're not often allowed the time to do the follow-up later on to say, how successful were you on implementing this information on your job afterwards? And so I think it's allowing for and communicating the importance of time, what that story looks like, and recognizing that it's much bigger than just an isolated unit within your organization.
So kind of looking at the poll questions and then looking at what the survey said, I think we're kind of in the same area. It's like clearly lack of time to get this done right is the number one. And we could probably do a roundtable just on what the definition of lack of time is. There was a little bit of difference, although the totals add up. It was interesting that the folks that took the survey ahead of time, a bigger percentage of people thought right technology was slowing them down, and a smaller percentage of the people here. But the combination of right technology, right content was clearly a gating factor in getting this done properly, aside from lack of time. So interesting insights. So we're following some very specific patterns. I know we're coming into the home stretch here. We're going to go back to the agenda slide to just cover the last couple points. I think we've done a good job of building a sustaining learning culture in diverse environments. We've talked about those strategies. Let's get down to measurement. Let's talk about that. Jill, Kylie, I'm going to have Kylie, you start off first. This is a big push. You probably get a lot of pressure as a CPO. I know a lot of other heads of HR and heads of learning and development out there are getting pressured on the fact that what is the real return on learning? Show me that learning moved the needle on these business metrics. And most learning and development organizations are not prepared to do that. They're prepared to talk about learning, what we call learning centric messages, like hours of training completed, hours of training delivered, grades, completed, certifications, all these different things. A way of showing the catalyst around learning and what that catalyzed, and satisfaction scores, all of that. But when you're in the boardroom or you're in the big meeting and you're representing that, maybe you can give some insight to everyone out there as to what types of metrics should you at least begin with in order to connect it to the business. How do you make sure that learning can sit at the table and say, that happened because of learning?
Yeah. I mean, I think Jill's definitely touched on this, and her and I have had quite a lot of conversations around just industry, what this looks like and how difficult it is, but also maybe where do we start ourselves at Litmos? And one of the things we're looking at within my team and that Jill and I have talked about is starting with maybe an easier place to find some metrics, which would be sales. maybe there's a specific function in your organization that has very specific metrics that you can look at. And tying it back to your functional training as well, and what role you may play in the functional training, or maybe you have a team who sits within the function that does, that training specifically, whether it's a global team or a centralized, decentralized team. We've started, again, 2 years in, we've started just recently working on metrics within our sales organization and thinking through the functional onboarding process specifically for new hires. And this is going to take time to track, because again, you can't just, you have to have the data to go back to from over time to start tracking it around, what we put in place for the onboarding process, global onboarding into functional onboarding for sales. And then what metrics are we looking at for, closed won opportunities, for performance data within sales, how quickly maybe they have started to close within the ramp times, 30, 60, 90 ramp times. What are some metrics around, closing deals or whatever it looks like quickly as well. And so I don't have the answer around, specifically metrics for an organization. I think we have to think about the nuances in unique areas in which we play, what industries we're in, what our customer base looks like as well. But I do think that there could be places to start and build that program out collectively, because you have to have the data over time to go back and look at it. And that takes time. Someone's not going to be ramped fully, in 30, 60, 90 days by any means. So maybe I pause there, Jill, if there's anything else in our conversations to add.
No, but again, I think it's telling that story, and it's looking at how are you integrating that training in over time, so it's not just something that's getting thrown into someone their first day of orientation with their organization, but how are we building it in? And just to kind of add to what Kylie was saying, I think ROI is a very overwhelming topic for anyone in L&D and HR, and it's one that people are always asking us. And of course, there's metrics and formulas that are out there, but to actually be able to do it is quite difficult. But I think looking at what are those small successes, and I think breaking it down by function, breaking it down by tasks and skills is a way to start gaining some momentum within your organization to show what that ROI looks like. And I think, it's a culture shift within your organizations. It goes back to making sure everyone understands what's your organization's strategy. Does everyone in your organization know what the learning strategy is? And then again, it needs to be owned by everyone, and you need to make sure you've got the infrastructure in place to support that strategy. You need to make sure that it's communicated and everyone understands it, and everyone's working together to uphold that as well.
Yeah, there's an interesting question that came in about getting first person information from the learners about their ability to do their job better. And that's half of it. But the other half that, that we see in working with organizations worldwide on this is managerial observations go even farther. We have a fairly big client that gets all of their learning budget approved simply by going back to the managers and saying, did we deliver? Are people able to do the things that you need them to do to meet your business metrics? And that overwhelming answer is a very compelling answer, because I think the key to this, to kind of wrap it up, is we often say to people, the most dramatic change in learning and development is you no longer hold your own report card. The business holds it. You could put a lot of time and energy into learning, but if the business doesn't think you move the needle, then it doesn't matter how much effort you put in. There's no participation awards in learning these days. So let's launch the fourth and final poll question, since we're talking about metrics. And how do you measure learning in your organization? Feel free to mark all or as many that apply. Okay, let's see what people said. Okay, not a surprise. It's almost identical to what we saw in the survey. Is we're still relying almost 80% of the time on, did you like the course? Did you like the learning? You know, those smiley sheets, that level 1 Kirkpatrick. And I think if we look at the survey results leading into this, they're almost identical numbers. Why is it that, Jill and Kylie, why are people, with all of this time and energy that we've put in, where we know the learning's no longer the outcome, performance is, great performance is going to make someone feel more engaged, and they're going to want to stick around longer. They're going to feel like this is a great place to work. And, you know, because I've had my learning supercharge my performance, I'm a rock star here. I may not be able to recreate that scenario someplace else. So I think I'm going to stay. But why is performance improvement always the lowest score?
I
Any
think
thoughts?
it's because it takes time.
Mhm.
You know, a lot of times we go through training, and that means you've had to stop working on whatever it is you're supposed to be working on for your job to attend training. And usually when we return back to work, the emails are piling up and the to-do list is continuing to get longer, and we're focused on trying to catch up. The other thing when we think about timing is it's not just allocating time for these changes to happen, just for like a learner to digest it and apply this new information, but where's our organization at in terms of timing these things? I think being able to really plan out and go with all of the different initiatives you've got going on within your organization and all of the different roles, like at what time does training take place, and then at what time are we trying to make a shift with whatever a new process or initiative may be, and then again allowing extended time to see those changes, you know, be enacted. L&D professionals struggle a lot with how much follow-up can you do with your learners, how much access do you have to your learners beyond the LMS, beyond those learning modules. We don't want to be surveying our employees every week to say how much have you improved. We don't want to burn people out and have people feel like they're engaged in survey fatigue. But again, I think it's being able to do some of those self-reported measures are helpful. I think it's, again, it comes back to some of those more informal metrics. Do you have employees talking with their managers and supervisors? What adjustments are being made to their jobs? And these aren't always things that get reported regularly to show that we're seeing these subtle changes in performance. And I think there's a lot of performance improvement that does occur that doesn't get reported, just because of the nature of work and the amount of time it takes to get some of those metrics in place.
And let me ask you a different way, just from your perspective. So looking at this number, we're saying only 62% of organizations use performance improvement as a key metric to measure success, but 82% use learner satisfaction. You know that when you walk in and talk to the business stakeholders in the corner office, they're going to be all about the last one, which is that's the ultimate connection. You know, performance improvement drives business metrics. Business metrics makes the whole thing go. People that are high performers are going to have a much higher retention level, longer tenure. They're going to get all the promotions, the best salary raises, all that. Why isn't that number 100%?
I think it's changing people's perceptions of what L&D is. And so L&D goes beyond the time you're sitting at your desk participating in an e-learning module, or the time if you're doing instructor-led training or you're going off on training. It goes beyond whatever that time is. And I think that's what people lose sight of. And so again, we don't factor in how much time it takes for someone to reflect on what they've just learned. We don't allocate a lot of time for people just to sit at their desks and think about how are they going to put some of these new skills in action. Do they have the infrastructure in place to do it? We could have employees that go through a lot of training. I'm sure everyone here on this call, we've all been there, where we've gone through training and we sit there and go, yeah, this is great in theory, but I don't have these tools when I go back to work. I can't do this. My organization's not ready for it yet, or my company's not going to invest in these resources that I need. And then that makes the training useless and stuff. And so I think it's thinking about what are all of those things that are needed to support L&D. It's looking at the infrastructure. It's looking at what that culture is and what's being prioritized. And it's not just an easy metric that you get where you get that immediate response from someone participating in a training unit.
Yeah, people change, your priorities change throughout the year. People come and go, managers come and go. You know, it's really it's a long-term play when we get to the last one versus you know, something quicker when we measure the learner satisfaction. So it's a big commitment when it comes to performance improvement to really track that and be on the same page with the business to do that as well.
Okay, we're right up about time. I'm going to ask you for the 1 minute close, but with a caveat, which is if you wanted to leave the audience with one thing they should do as soon as they get off of this roundtable, what's that one thing you'd want them to do in order to drive a stronger link between learning and retention? So I'll let you go first, Kylie.
Oh my gosh, there's so many things. Think about my own one thing I would do coming off of this call as well. But I think it's from my perspective, again, it depends, I think, on the role that you're in and where kind of you fit into your organization. But I think the one thing is just taking a step back and understanding what is your business strategy for 2025, because it's being built right now. And so make sure that you have some insight into that, or can get some insight into that, or can get some voice in that conversation if you don't already have it now, just so you know that your strategy is interwoven and locked into the business strategy.
Jill?
I would just say advocate, be advocates for an integrated strategy within your organization and really looking at what's needed to be able to do that. I think the more we can break down silos that sometimes just naturally form and occur, the more successful we're going to be in the long run.
Words to live by. We could talk about this forever. The energy and enthusiasm, compassion that you brought for learners by both of you is great. I mean, it's a real conundrum, right? We've got to be able to figure out in this crazy pivoting changes, you know, constantly kind of environment, how do we get learning to help both the business and the individual employees to create a great strategy for retention? I'm going to turn it over to our team to announce the lucky raffle winner.
Yes, thank you, Michael, and thank you to everyone for hanging around this long. Our first raffle winner, winning 50% off the HCM Excellence Conference in 2025, is Sharon Garland. Congratulations, Sharon. And our second raffle winner, winning a free Excellence in Action program submission, is Brandon Semling. Congratulations, Brandon.
So thank you both. Kylie, Jill, masterclass. I mean, I can tell that for everything that you said, there was 10 things in the back of your mind that you'd like to add to this as well. I definitely learned a lot, and I think it was great perspective. To our audience, I hope you enjoyed as well. Thanks for today. If you have any questions or want to contact Kylie or Jill directly, let us know. We can put you in contact with them. Again, this is Michael Rochelle for the Brandon Hall Group. Have a great day.